tell you about it later.
You are in room 1010. The right place. For the Economic Development Committee meeting of the Los Angeles City Council. I'm honored to be joined here today by Councilmember Nuri Martinez and Councilmember Paul Krikorian. Mr. Clerk, why don't you get us started?
Item number 1 is a joint CAO and CLA report relative to a bond expenditure agreement and related bond spending plan between the Community Redevelopment Agency of Los Angeles and the City of Los Angeles.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the only thing on our agenda today, and we shall take it up forthwith.
Good afternoon, Honorable Chair and distinguished members of the Economic Development Committee. I'm Oscar Ishko with the Office of the Chief Legislative Analyst, and with me is
Caroline Sim from the CAO's office.
The item for your consideration pertains to a bond expenditure agreement and related bond spending plan that would potentially allow for the transfer of up to $84.6 million in pre-2011 tax allocation bond proceeds, which we'll refer to as excess bond proceeds from here on. That would be money that the CRA is currently holding and would transfer over to the city to utilize. Pursuant to Assembly Bill 1484, which was the trailer bill that clarified and amended certain portions of the Redevelopment Dissolution Act, it provided successor agencies, with a finding of completion, the ability to continue using those unspent bond proceeds for the purpose in which they were intended. In our particular case, the City of Los Angeles is not the successor agency, so that is the whole foundation for this process going forward. The city staff is pursuing access of those funds to utilize in a manner that's of maximum benefit to the City of Los Angeles, as well as the affected taxing entities, which include the County of Los Angeles, the school districts, and community college districts. To do so, the City Council and Mayor would need to approve the bond expenditure agreement and the related bond spending plan that basically outlines the parameters in which the money would be provided to the city and the terms and so forth. Caroline will get into the details of what exactly the bond expenditure agreement and bond spending plan entail.
So the bond expenditure agreement is attachment B. It's a pretty short agreement, and it's the master agreement between the CRA LA and the City of Los Angeles. It basically just states that the CRA, if this whole action is approved by both the city side as well as the governing board, oversight board, and the DOF, the CRA would transfer $86.4 million to the city by January 30th, 2015, which is just around the corner. The city, on the other hand, will be obligated to spend the funds within the project areas that the bond proceeds originally came from, and then also follow the bond covenants that are in the bond documents. We will have to encumber and or disperse the funds within 5 years, and then by 10 years get rid of all of the dollars unless we want to give it back to the CRA-LA at that point. Attachment C is the bond spending plan, and that was developed with a large working group over the last several months with representatives from HCID, the Bureau of Engineering, Economic Workforce Development Department, the CLA's office, CAO, Mayor's office, and input from the council offices as well. And Attachment C is broken down, or the individual pages of Attachment C are broken down into 3 sections. The top section lists the individual bonds that were issued for a particular project area, and it's separated by tax exempt versus taxable dollars. And the second section shows the funding categories that we've created we've entitled Public Infrastructure, Community Facilities and Open Space, Affordable Housing, and Business Assistance and Catalytic Commercial Development. The potential projects at the bottom of the list include projects that were either listed already in the original bond documents, the redevelopment and or implementation plans for each project area, or they're newly proposed by this working group. The basic premise of this bond spending plan is that we're going to spend the dollars within the project areas that they came from, and then we're going to follow the bond covenants as we've promised to. And then lastly, the city can choose to transfer funds within projects, propose new projects, and spend money as they wish in the future, as long as we follow the bond covenants and spend within the project areas.
One of the further actions that's requested in the report is also the establishment of a bond oversight committee that could either utilize a new or existing committee, such as municipal facilities or the Prop K committee.
Who would be on that committee?
Well, we're asking that there be representation from the CAO's office, CLA, and mayor's office, and the recommendation requests that CAO and CLA report within 90 days. First, on the determination of the Department of Finance, whether this gets approved, and then also to provide the framework in which that bond oversight committee would operate and administer the city's use of those funds. Although we mentioned $86.4 million is what the city would be receiving, the actual gross amount that is available is 89.8, of which the CRA is holding back 3.4 million approximately, and that is to administer the tax-exempt bond issuances. The CRA, at the end of the day, continues to remain on the hook for this money. They continue to service the debt on this money, so they're basically holding that money back to help finance some of those costs. The bond documents do allow for the city to access some of the bond funds to pay for administration, and that's something that we can work out. We would work out through the Bond Oversight Committee and include in our report back to council and mayor.
When will these funds be available?
The funds would be,
Technically,
if all the approvals go forward, the funds would be transferred to the city by the end of January 2015, and we would hold the money in a special account, and it would then be the operation of the Bond Oversight Committee to administer how the money gets allocated or the recommendations that move forward to council and mayor. The timeline is, the reason that we're moving this so quickly is the CRA has requested that the city take its actions, get its approvals prior to the CRA moving forward on any of its actions. They are taking this item forward to their governing board on September 11th. They would then take it to their oversight board on September 23rd. And if both boards approve, it would move forward to the Department of Finance as part of their next budget cycle, which is their Recognized Obligation Payment Schedule 1415B, which covers January through June of 2015. That would be submitted to the Department of Finance the first week of October. And historically, the Department of Finance has provided a determination in late November. So as early as late November, we would know if all of this is approved, and we can expect $86.4 million to be transferred over to the city in late January. So,
and are subsequent approvals going to change these?
the approvals as far as like what's listed in the bond spending plan?
Yeah, the spending plan.
The spending plan,
Or is this,
yeah, as Caroline mentioned, the spending plan is currently, it's a working document. It basically lays out a reference point in which we've given this thorough thought with referencing the bond documents, the implementation plans, internal discussions with city departments and council offices as to what are the parameters, first of all, what are the parameters in which the money can be spent, and which projects can we identify today that we could potentially spend this money on. But there is language in the expenditure agreement that clearly provides the city its sole discretion to amend the spending plan from time to time, so we would be able to add new projects, remove projects, move money within categories as long as the bond fund sources allow it. We have that ability, and so it's something that's going to be amended from time to time.
I have a couple of questions.
no,
So the bond proceedings are issued through various project areas.
Correct.
And some of them overlap council districts. So how are you going to allocate these funds? Would it be evenly split, or is it first come, first serve?
Well, what our office has reviewed and communicated to our one-on-one meetings with each council office is we would most likely look at these funds in the same manner that we look at AB 1290 funds. We basically look at how much percentage in acreage each council district has within each redevelopment project area. So based on those percentage splits, we would take that into account in identifying how much funds are potentially available to each council district. As you mentioned, a redevelopment project area can consist of various council districts. And so we would identify what those amounts are, and that would be something that we would present to the Bond Oversight Committee to consider and how they administer these funds. But it would be a percentage based on the acreage in which it falls.
Have you received any feedback from the Oversight Board or the State Department of Finance on what are our chances of getting something like this approved?
I think the precedent is good. Oakland had gotten a similar
Depends what other
program.
municipality has-
Other municipalities have gotten it approved.
Who else? Oakland and who else?
Oakland, South El Monte is another one.
And the fact that the staff over at the CRA have been very supportive in providing us with all the documentation needed to understand how much money is available and the parameters in which we could spend this money. One being that a condition that the CRA has firmly expressed is that the funds be spent within the redevelopment project area boundaries. In the past, redevelopment law would allow money to be spent outside of the boundaries if there would be a finding of benefit, but in this particular case, because they are on hook for this money at the end of the day, they want to make sure that we're strictly spending it within the boundaries of the project area, and this is something that's being done consistently with the city of Oakland, and we know that the city of South El Monte is also following the same path. So,
And can you walk me through how these funds would be, how would we spend these funds if the committee were to approve this and we get sign off from the state? Would this come as in a form of a motion? Would we have a say-so on what projects get approved?
well, a lot of those.
Type of projects, and when would we start to do this?
Well, the report itself is requesting that the council and mayor establish a bond oversight committee that would basically work out those details. All the items that you've mentioned are things that we know we need to take into consideration. We need to determine how exactly is the city going to administer these funds. What we're proposing is that the bond oversight committee would first of all have to make sure that the city spends the money adhering to the underlying bond covenants. That's first and foremost. Second is that that we follow the terms of the bond expenditure agreement and that it's following the guidance of the bond spending plan. Then the oversight committee would be tasked to establish criteria for prioritizing projects that are project ready, may have full funding, or this funding may help leverage other funding, and then they would make recommendations to the council and mayor. In that process, we would definitely make sure that the council offices and other departments in the city would have an opportunity to solicit those funds. And
Could another approach be that perhaps the CLA's office be used as a clearinghouse, and that the funds, how we spend the money, be initiated by council action and reviewed by this committee?
that is an option. Currently, that is the way that AB 1290 funds are administered. The fact that we were proposing something that is, just allows other departments to have an input, an opportunity to put forward other, projects that other departments would want to try and fund. We wanted it. That's why we were following the municipal facilities type of framework for this particular one. But that is an option.
So how do we bring that option? Because the only option right now, if we approve this, is to move forward with the oversight committee approach. So how do we look into the option I just described?
Let me back up a little bit before going to that question, but one benefit of having an oversight committee is that there is kind of that clearinghouse, that one-stop shop that will be responsible for the reporting, all of the audit requirements that are required by the CRA. So even though CRA is on the hook, they're going to come back to the city to get all of the backup documents, make sure there's proper accounting, et cetera, for years to come. I've only joined the city since December, but what I've noticed oftentimes is that sometimes when there are council motions, maybe not the appropriate departments maybe don't find out about it until later. So having an oversight committee might be helpful in kind of just keeping track of things so that when times for audits and reports come, there is one responsible entity for administration.
Did you ask Mr. Price, who would sit on the board on the oversight committee? Did you ask that question already? Or?
Well, we asked, but it hasn't been determined yet. I guess it's...
Yeah, we would recommend that there be representation by the CEO's office, CLA, and mayor for sure. There may be other departments that would help with like staffing the committee, but that's still has not been fully determined. And that would be part of the report back to this committee and council, is that we provide what that framework would be and who the parties that would be involved in administering those funds. So, and that would be an opportunity to, weigh in your opinions or recommendations, requests on how that committee should operate.
And the CRA-LA has reserved the $3.4 million for administrative costs. Is the city going to have that same opportunity? How are we covering our costs?
Sure.
Can we absorb it? Or can we absorb, I'm sure we're going to have to incur some sort of cost.
Right, there are administration costs for the city as well. So the portion that CRA is keeping comes out to about 3.66% of the gross bond proceeds. And by law, taxable bonds are allowed, admin costs are allowed to be up to 10% for tax exempt bonds. And I think the general industry average is about 3 to 7%. So assuming 7% on the high end is what's allowed for admin costs overall, you can deduct 3.66 from 7% and know that the remainder of it could probably be used for admin costs on the city side.
Thank you for this good work. Off the top of my head, I think I like the idea of having the oversight committees rather than making this more of the model of like a discretionary funds kind of situation. I think it's probably more defensible as being consistent with the intentions from which these funds were first derived. Obviously, council will, no matter what the model is, though, even if it's an oversight committee that creates recommendations, it's still going to have to be approved by us, right?
Yes, correct.
So the recommendations would come to this committee. They'd be referred from this committee to council. We'd have an opportunity to have our voices heard at the front end and also at the back end as well.
Correct.
Okay. And on the administrative cost issue, how was that? I get that each of the amounts that are stated on the spending plan were essentially the amounts that were derived from that project area, right? There wasn't some allocation formula applied. It was simply whatever was left in that area.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Because otherwise it would be inconsistent with the original intent of the funds. So, by the same token, how was the administrative cost retention from CRA-LA of the 3.66? How was that pulled out of these amounts? Mm-hmm. Was it done across the board, or is it only applied to the non-taxable bond funds on a pro rata basis?
We didn't analyze the how they came up with that 3.66%. We do know that it wasn't proportionally taken from each project area or proportionally taken from tax exempt or taxable. What we did
It was or was not?
It was not. So what we did notice, though, was that they took it from the project areas that had the lowest balances. Like, for instance, Mid-City had $156 of tax exempt bond proceeds. So it would probably cost us a lot more staff time and resources to take that and spend that $156. So they kind of did us a favor by just wiping out that balance. So Mid-City will not be getting any funds. That also goes for CD9, unfortunately. There was a small balance in there, and they wiped that as well. So I could look into that further and report back to you about how they chose to deduct from each project area.
I'd like to make sure that there was some fairness and equity in that process, because, for example, some of the project areas have only taxable bond funds. Mm-hmm. Some of them have only tax-exempt bond funds. Mm-hmm. So how does the administrative fee apply to those? Mm-hmm. Just as long as it's on some fair basis so that everybody kind of pays their proportionate share, that's fine. I just want to make sure that one part of the city doesn't end up subsidizing the administrative fee for other parts of the city.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'll find that out from CRA.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We've been joined by Councilmember Cedillo. I know you've had a chance to, read this. Any comments?
I'll defer.
Defer at this time? Okay. Before we take a vote, we do have a card. Let's, Cesar Diaz from Council District 3.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and fellow council members. My name is Cesar Diaz, and I'm with the Office of Councilmember Bob Bloomfield. We are here in support of this bond expenditure agreement and bond spending plan. The item before you represents the opportunity to fulfill promises that were made to the communities in different areas. Therefore, the only concern we would have is related to the Oversight Committee, and I think several of the council members, like Councilmember Martinez, mentioned some of the concerns and possibilities in different structures that could exist. So we would ask that the CLA report back on what is a possible potential for that committee or the structure of that committee. So again, thank you, and I know this is a time-sensitive item to go before the governing board, so we appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you. We do want to make sure that these funds get to the areas of need. That's the whole idea. And certainly the council office should have, I won't say ultimate authority, but certainly a hand in helping to allocate, helping to identify what the priorities are, whatever the structure is.
If I can add, I would like for you to go back and look at the approach I described as well as an option.
So in the report back, you would like us to present both approaches?
Correct.
Okay, we can do that.
Right. As she described.
And just so I may add one other reason that we took the Oversight Committee approach is because the CRA's Oversight Board is going to be one of the bodies that reviews this, and you have the various affected taxing entities that sit on that board. Part of this, the strategy here is to make sure that we're presenting something that benefits all the taxing entities. It's something that just doesn't benefit the city of Los Angeles alone, but that benefits the county, benefits the school districts, benefits the community college districts, because their other option is to continue to service the debt the way they currently hold it, and the money basically just sits there. And the County of Los Angeles is also putting forward a refunding or refinancing program that allows the CRA to restructure its debt and allows them to save money, and it basically would prevent the unspent proceeds to be utilized. And we think that by putting forward a more comprehensive approach that's going to go through various levels of review is going to sit better with the Oversight Board members.
Okay, well, again, let's maybe identify the alternative.
Yes,
maybe a little
definitely.
chart comparing the two, or what the features would be, what the difficulties are as you see them, so that we can
Yes.
effectively evaluate both ideas.
Okay.
Okay. Mr.
If I may, Mr.
Paul.
Chairman, two other quick things. One is the council was quite pointed in deciding not to be a successor agency back in the day. So is there any risk that by entering into a bond expenditure agreement like this, that we take on any of the liabilities that we were seeking to avoid when we chose not to become a successor agency?
No, there is not. The expenditure agreement is basically focused on the city's use of the bond funds solely, and the only risk we're basically preventing any risk that the CRA would have. Once the money transfers over, the city is liable for how it spends that money. But at the end of the day, the CRA has to make sure that we're following the covenants, the parameters in which the money can be spent. So that's the only risk there.
Great.
Yeah.
And then the chairman and the council president and the mayor and many others have been working really hard to try to fund a larger economic development strategy in our city. And I'm wondering that along the lines of Ms. Martinez's question about the city's administrative costs, is it feasible at all for the project area funds to support funding for a larger economic development strategy that would benefit each of the project areas and presumably other parts of the city as well? But is there any, have you looked at that? Is there any way that we can do that, or is it just, must it strictly be within the black line boundaries of the map of the project area?
Well, when it comes to use of these particular excess bond proceeds, they have to be spent within the project area boundaries. Something that we've taken into consideration or are considering is the possibility of having a department such as the Economic and Workforce Development Department to staff the Bond Oversight Committee, and they would be able to access some of those administrative fees or those administrative costs that are eligible, and that would serve to not only administer the funds, but to help move forward this as an economic development program throughout the city. So that is something that we are looking at and would consider for our report back.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, without objection, we'll approve the CLA-CAO joint report recommendations with the amendments from Member Maturi, Councilman Martinez regarding the alternative schedules. Without objection, that will be the order. Is there any other business coming before the committee at this time?
That clears the desk.
Pardon?
There are no other items.
No other items?
Clears the
This
desk.
meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
All right.